Hello. Hope lunch was good. Give you a chance to get headphones on, and then we'll get in. I can speak Danish and Swedish now, so it's only taken me a few years. Earlier this year, I had two events in my conference calendar for the first half of the year that I wanted to attend. The first being the triumphant return of UDUF, the Umbraco Down Under Festival in Sydney, Australia, in April, and obviously Codegarden, which is here and now. I didn't submit talks for either of those events. I was planning on attending and just being with the people and enjoying myself that way. And then in you think of all the things that I can actually... Ooh. There we go, yes! Then, in February, this one popped up in my LinkedIn feed from Peter Gregory, one of the brains behind UDUF Festival. Pete's here this week. Pete wrote, "Hey, Nathan Woulfe, how's things? Are you going to be able to make it to UDUF in Sydney? Would be great to see you there." I thought Pete was just, reaching out, being friendly, saying hello, but no. I ended up talking about Umbraco Engage, DXP, sitting in on a couple of panel sessions, and generally having a really, really busy UDUF, which was fine. That was great. Nice to be, wanted and needed. And I guess in a sweet little ironic touch, Pete's here this week. Pete wasn't speaking this week. Pete is now speaking this afternoon. I'm pretty sure it's the same session or a riff at least on the session he did at UDUF, which was really interesting and well worth checking out. So get along. Back from UDUF, Codegarden program comes out. Browsing through that, having a look at all the sessions that are on, who's talking, what they're talking about. And there was this little empty blue Umbraco Workflow box, which turns out that was this session, and it should have had my name against it. So both my responsibility-free conferences disappeared, but that's okay. We can't all be like suits guys floating around looking busy. Some of us have to be busy. That's fine. So anyway, real quick intro for those of you who I haven't met. My name's Nathan Woulfe. I'm a staff engineer in the DXP group at Umbraco HQ, DXP being the Digital Experience Platform group. I've been around Umbraco for years, worked at HQ for almost 3. I built the workflow package, which was previously called Plumber, which is now Umbraco Workflow. That's what we're going to be looking at today. And that D in DXP is obviously for digital, but it also stands for distributed, because we are very much a distributed remote team. We are in no particular order, Romania, the UK, Poland, Netherlands, Vietnam, Denmark, and myself in Australia. We've grown from a team of 4 people when I joined HQ 3 years ago. We're now at 11, soon to be 12. That 12th person is at Codegarden this week. I'm not going to name them, because that's not my news to share. If they want to reveal themselves, they can. Relax, Bladder. I know it's exciting. But that growth's great, because it's a reflection on, I guess, the broader state of Umbraco and how HQ is growing, products are growing, we're getting busier, there's more work to be done. And also going from 11 to 12 is really good for anyone with OCD, because it's a nice round, even number, and it means we have to hire in 2s from now on. Anyway. This is what DXP does. I appreciate this isn't probably what you're here to hear about, but we're getting to a point. We do commercial products. So we do deploy, forms, workflow, commerce, UI builder, most recently Umbraco Engage. We also look after Umbraco.com, the Umbraco Marketplace, licensing, authorized services package, the storage providers package, a whole stack of integrations, and a whole heap of add-ons and providers and things around those other packages. And can we have a quick guess at when HQ started taking brand identity seriously? There's more to come in that space, but again, not mine to reveal. So that we're sure we're all in the right place, this is not meditation or yoga. This is new page 11, not final, 15/9/2025. And it is a silly name, but it's... We're going to look at some serious new features in Umbraco Workflow in version 16. The latest push, I guess, to make content governance in Umbraco more scalable, more flexible, and more editor-friendly. helping teams deal with draft content, approval of draft content, scheduling, and releasing content in, I'm hoping, a way that's smoother and friendlier than what you've been able to do previously. Those are big promises. I appreciate that, but what do they say? You shoot for the stars and land on the moon. So the moon's fine. So today, we're going to actually do some looking at these new features. So 3 things we're going to look at being alternate versions, release sets, and entity-agnostic workflows, which sounds really fancy, but it's not super complicated. So it's sort of one big feature. They all sort of work together, but each of those parts can be used somewhat independently. It has been a long time coming. I previewed a very early demo at Codegarden last year. We'd been talking about it. I bowed Sven up at HQ probably 2 years ago to start talking about it. I'm going to blame Engage acquisitions and rebuilding back offices and all those sorts of things for monopolizing time. So we got there. We're going to have a look at it today. So save and publish is perfectly fine, isn't it? Is it? Is it? No? Yes? It is. For a small, moderate-sized site, it's completely fine. We edit content, we save content, we publish content. But on larger scale sites where we have bigger teams, we have heavier content governance requirements, we might have rogue editors who just kind of like the vibe of what they're doing. They're not too worried about brand and voice and tone. They just vibe it. You run into issues. There's no oversight, and there's perhaps no sort of real accountability. And if that second icon doesn't make sense to you, please take your headphones off, head to reception, and Ken, being an adult, he'll be able to explain what that actually is. Thanks, Ken. Oh, Ken can't hear me. So, it doesn't take long, though, for content to end up here, where we have lots of different editors all publishing their own take, like I said, on voice and brand and message. I've got to make sure I don't click too many times. And once that governance is lost, it can be really difficult to get it back. So what's the solution? Obviously, it's Umbraco Workflow. That's why we're here. So hopefully we're all somewhat at least familiar with Workflow. Originally built to bring structured content approvals into the back office. It's now grown into a broader sort of editorial toolset where it's less about approval workflow and more about editor workflow. We've added content reviews and advanced search, the features we're going to look at today being alternate versions and release sets. And these are all tools that improve the CMS experience, but they don't belong in the CMS itself. But Workflow's always been about content. At its heart, Workflow is a tool for content approval. And just so we're all on the same page and we know what I'm talking about when I'm talking content approval, in the Workflow context, that means we set up approval groups, we assign those groups into pathways or approval flows or something that actually needs a proper name, and we shift away from that publish and pray approach and give content creators, I guess, structure that they didn't really know that they needed. I guess that's pretty much everything I want to say about content approvals, because that's not what we're here for. We've got some new things to look at. And we're going to go and have a look at content editing, and it's perfectly okay, isn't it? I hope we think it's perfectly okay, because the content editing experience in Umbraco is genuinely a pleasant one. It's, there's been a lot of thought and time and effort and energy from a lot of very clever people has been put into improving the back office and the overall editor experience. Again, to really take it to its most basic, we know how it works. We create a draft document, we edit that draft document, we publish the draft document, we use Workflow to approve it to send it for approval for publish, I should say. And the page goes live, we edit, we approve, we repeat, we edit, we approve, we repeat. However, editing isn't always linear. You can be building out a new version of a page. You've already built it, published it, building out a new version. Someone finds a mistake on the published page. What do? Do we most likely we do the sort of rollback gymnastics where we take our draft version, we roll back to the previous published version, we make the change we need in that version, we publish that version, then we revert the rollback back to our last edited version and hope that we picked all the right versions. And, and that's not, I don't think that's content editing. That's beyond what we should be asking of editors. So, as a more concrete example, we can walk through it. Jane updates a bunch of blocks on the homepage. Lots of blocks, really complex page. Starts working on the next version of that page. Then Joe comes in, and Joe finds a typo on the live page, and Jane's like, Joe, damn it. And to fix it, though, Jane then has to undo her work. However she does that, she has to either roll it back or copy her work out. Whatever it is she has to do, she loses progress and loses the context of where she was at. She gets frustrated, and she's still like, Joe, damn you, Joe. And that's totally understandable, because editors just want to be creating content. They don't want to have to be, I guess, not fighting with the CMS, but like wrestling against what they want to be doing compared to what the CMS is letting them do. And that happens because a document has a single draft version. We can have multiple editors update a single draft, but that's the sole version. It will be the next one that goes live. And that's how we end up here. And that's how we end up with the name for this session. We end up with things like home v2, home 1 not final, home 2 draft for July, home v2 1 backup. Do not delete but check for Tom first. And so you end up where nobody knows what's current and nobody wants to touch anything for fear of breaking something. And instead, it's easier, maybe we'll just work on what we want to work on as another new version of that page, and we'll come back and we'll clean it up later. But of course, we don't come back and clean it up later. Instead, we build content graveyards. And we don't want to build content graveyards because, for one, they're spooky and dark and we don't want to be there. But our content doesn't want to be there either. Content wants to be published and consumed and distributed and appreciated. So how do we get out? How do we escape the graveyard? There's lots of different ways we can do this. We have the Backoffice clipboard. We can copy and paste blocks, we can move things around that way, and that's completely fine. That's a really nice solution. We can move entire grids. I probably shouldn't admit to, but did build a property editor at one point for the legacy grid that let us export the entire grid JSON and import it into another node. And it worked, it was fine technically, but is that something editors should be doing? Should they have to know about the JSON that lies under their content? Of course they shouldn't. We can move documents in the tree. We could say, well, here's our new version of the homepage. We're going to move everything under it just so that we can switch some content around. That's not, it's technically it works, but it's not a great option. I've seen sites where the homepage or the root node has no content of its own, but it has a picker where you select what you want to be the homepage and you link it up. That, again, I know, technically it's fine, but it's not a great user experience. So they're all options that are technically possible, but they're not friendly. They're not user-friendly. We need to give editors a smoother way to version and, I guess, promote content. So what if instead of this, where we have multiple editors updating one draft, what if instead we had this, where we have multiple drafts? We can still have one or many editors all updating different drafts, but ultimately one of them is the one that goes live. That's alternate versions. So to update our previous example, Jane can update the homepage and she can publish it and workflow it, approve it that way. But then she creates the next version as an alternate version. So when Joe comes in and finds that typo on the homepage, he can just update it and publish it. Jane keeps working on her new version. Joe creates his own version of the homepage because he thinks he knows better than what Jane's doing. Jack comes in and he updates the homepage as well. Jane can then set her version as the Backoffice draft. Workflow handles approval, and it's published. We have a set of alternate drafts. We have the main Backoffice draft. No one gets in each other's way. So we're going to have a look at how that works, hopefully. So as a little caveat, the bearings in the fans on this laptop died last week, so it might start sounding like a helicopter. I've powered everything as far down as possible, but we'll see how we go. So in Workflow too, before we kick this off, it's Workflow being a licensed product. We have this concept of a test license. So when we're running locally from Visual Studio or your IDE of choice, We can configure a test license, which gives us access to all features, so we can do these sorts of demos. We can do demos for clients, show them what they're going to get when they buy their license. And we'll come back to this feature flags piece shortly. But if we build this, and obviously it will take longer than it should because everything's turned down as far as we can go, so we don't have any fans turned on. It'll build, it'll start. This is a V16 site. It will start. It's better than the fan noise, trust me. And this should log me straight into, shouldn't have to do any passwords, usernames, which is lovely. Just talk amongst yourselves. Do we have hold music? It is coming, I promise. Just builds a bit of suspense. It's good. Yeah. Yeah. It actually makes it really, I feel like I'm adjusting to time zones, and I turn this on and go, ugh. There we go. Almost. Oh, this is... Right, there we go. I know. That was worth the wait. Look, it's the back office, like we all know, like we've all seen with our tree. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at how alternate versions works. And what we'll do an invariant page to start with, just for a quick simple one. So we'll call it our invariant page. We'll give it a title, and we'll give it some body text. So this is groundbreaking stuff, really amazing, simple site, and just for the interests of completeness, we'll come back when that actually publishes, because again, we're running pretty slowly. So what we saw with alternate versions was this idea of being able to create drafts that don't impact the back office draft. So we have our back office draft, like we saw, with a title and some body text. But now we can go and create versions of it. So when we create a new version, we get a clone of the back office draft, so we get all the same property values, but then we can give it a new name, and we'll just call it version 2. Body text for version 2, and we can save that. And this all works with Workflow. We're not using Workflow with it at the moment, because then we have to jump around all over the place. So there we go, there's our back office published with a title and some body text on my design-heavy website. So we've saved our version. We can now see that we have a version 2. We can go back and we can change this version. But the useful part is we can take version 2 and we can make it current. And that will set it as the back office draft when it has a little think about it. Demos are such a good idea. Although if it was a video, you'd still be sort of waiting, watching spinning wheels. Oh, that's not useful. Anyway, we'll ignore that. That was probably a timeout. But now we can see that our version 2 is now our back office draft. So we can publish that just like we would any other back office draft. It'll update back over here. But then we've also, in the switch between those two versions, the previous back office draft is now created as a version that we can edit without having to do any rollbacks and anything silly like that. We could go back in and edit body text for draft. We could save it again. We can hopefully not wait as long for it to become current. That's how it's meant to work. Version 2 is back to being a draft, or sorry, an alternate version. Our content now has the previous version back in the back office, and we can then publish that again, and we're kind of back to where we started. We've got the original draft back as the draft, our first version is back as a version, and you can see how we could then go in and create more versions. So you can be working on the version of the homepage that you need for 6 weeks' time. You can be working on that without blocking the day-to-day minor edits and tweaks that need to happen to your homepage. This all uses the new back office workspaces, so we've got the same sort of ideas. No history because this is a new one. Let's get one that actually has something to show. We get the info app. We can see some publication statuses. We get history and things eventually when we start making some changes to that. This is variant. It works with content variants. So if we had a variant version of this page, we can create alternate versions per culture and then switch them around independently. So in a demo that probably took twice as long as it should have while we waited patiently for things, that is how alternate versions work. On its own, maybe not super useful, but it all comes together, trust me. Content scheduling. Again, it's perfectly okay, isn't it? Yes, of course it is. And I don't want this to be seen as me having a stab at the way the CMS works, because that's not the intention. But like Save and Publish, for small or simple sites, the current scheduling works fine. Like in 16 in particular, it's much improved on earlier versions. The UI, the UX has both been, they've been uplifted. It's fine if you don't have dozens or, God forbid, hundreds of documents being scheduled all over your site and at different points in the calendar. If that's you, it's fine. You've got nothing to worry about. Life's good. You edit, you select a date, you sit back and you wait, and your content goes live. But again, what happens if you do have dozens or, God forbid, hundreds of scheduled documents or documents to schedule? We're back in this sort of situation again where we quickly lose oversight and governance, and one more click. And we're back in this. We don't know what's happening on our website. So right now, it's one document at a time. You can't group updates. You can't coordinate like a proper release for your content. And I don't think that's how teams work in the real world. With complex content needs, you need that oversight, and you need a way to bring it all together. And the solution for that is release sets. So with release sets, we can bundle multiple versions, the versions that we were just looking at, those alternate versions. We can bundle multiple versions, schedule them, publish them all against that schedule from one central interface. So we're not having to crawl across the site, looking for content, finding when it's scheduled, making sure everything's synchronized. We get the one interface to oversee all of it. I'm not 100% sold on the name still. I'd like the idea of calling it collections, but unfortunately, the Backoffice already has collections. So we're sticking with release sets, and I guess like a red-headed stepchild, I'm allowed to say that, I used to be a ginger, we'll grow to love it. I'm sure we'll grow to love it. So this was released in v16. It is behind a feature flag because it's ready, but it's not ready. And getting it out in 16 then gives us time to essentially test it in public, build it in public, and have it super solid and polished for the v17 LTS. So we opt in via app settings, and that was the little snippet we saw before with feature flags. And this is also a good caveat for the next demo when I'm probably going to run into unexpected behavior, aka, bugs. It's ready, it's not ready. So let's have a look at release sets and how they work. There we go. Yes, cool. So, where are my release sets? There they are. So we get a new dashboard, and it's empty. That's great. That's what we wanted. So when we create a release set, we get a lovely empty calendar because we've got nothing in our release set yet. So we'll call it a demo set. I'll just save it so that, just in case we don't lose anything. And we start by adding documents. We can pick our document. We're going to choose the homepage because every good release set has a homepage in it. We choose our new homepage, and we can either add an existing version or we can create a new version. I'm not going to go down the create a new version path. That's what we were just doing with alternate versions. It takes us back to that same interface. We can create versions. We've seen that. That's old news. But we can add existing versions, and here's some I've prepared earlier. So the homepage has 4 different versions. And we're going to add home v2 to our release set. Cool, done. Saved, release set, finished. So our release set now has one item in it, And when it publishes now, because we haven't set any scheduling, we'll see that the homepage changes to homepage v2. That's all fine, not super exciting, but it gets a whole lot more useful when we start doing things like this. We're going to schedule the homepage change for tomorrow. Let's just do that. So now we've got it scheduled for 9:10 tomorrow. Save that. Again, shouldn't have to save it between every step, but bugs. We can go back in. We're going to add another version. So on Sunday, we want the homepage to change. Because we have a release date on the previous one, obviously the next date needs a release. And it's the Sunday version, so we'll say the 22nd. And then we can schedule that. So you can see how you could build out, you could potentially have a dozen different versions of the homepage. And we're going to roll through, and automatically we can schedule them. We can have it just scheduling service in the background. We'll just run through and publish each one as those dates pass, which is all good. That's cool. We can do it with one document. But the real power then is that you can add as many different documents as you want, as many different versions of those documents, and queue them and schedule them to build out really, really complex content campaigns. So that's sort of the main side of it. But then alongside adding documents, we have the concept of adding tasks. And a task it's essentially a to-do list. So the release set can have tasks that are things that have to happen before the release set should be published. They're not things that have to happen in the CMS, but they could be things like a CPC campaign, because there's no point in publishing all our great content if we haven't gone out and bought the ads. And then we can assign that to, at the moment, it has to be assigned to a CMS user, but it would make sense that we extend this and say you can assign it to anyone. We can send them notifications. We might be able to put a due date on it. So you can restrict the publication of the release set until some non-CMS criteria have been fulfilled. So now we have a task, and we see that we hopefully, can't save and publish that because we have either draft content, or in this case we have draft content and an incomplete task. So that will block that set from publishing. And until we publish it, and it's set into that status of being ready to deploy, nothing happens. We can keep adding content, and then when we hit that mark where it's ready to go, everything's published, save and publish, scheduling takes over. You can walk away and not touch your website for the next 6 weeks because you've scheduled everything. We'll get out of there. And then this sort of works in both directions too. So if we go back to, what did we add? The homepage. Wait just patiently while it catches up. Back to our versions, we can now see that those versions have been added to a set. So we've got some security around if someone comes in and says, hey, we don't want these, can't delete them, they're in a set. So there's some safeguards and things like that in place so that if you're at the point where you do have dozens of versions across lots of different documents, a few different release sets with different versions and things in it, you've got some safety nets to make sure that people don't go and blow things up while you're sunning yourself on the beach in Majorca because you set your website just to do its own thing. So I think that was everything for release sets. I mean, again, this is all, it's variant aware. So within a release set, you can add your documents, you can add variants of those documents, you can add collections of variant versions of those documents. So it's a little bit almost of a naff demo, given that we can't actually demo the scheduled publishing, but you can see how you could build out those sets and make something quite complex. But at the same time, it's taking something that was already very complex when that content's spread across your site, and you can bundle it all back into one place and get that oversight and control back over your content. I think that's enough of that. Let's continue. Oh no. I said I wasn't having a stick at the CMS, because now I'm going to take shots at myself. What's wrong with approval workflows? The thing that's wrong with approval workflows is that they've always been tied to documents. And that is limiting, because not everything in the back office is a document. Now, in a perfect world, we'd have approvals on documents, on versions, on release sets, on users, on media, on anything essentially that has a workspace. It's an entity, we should be able to workflow it. Also, finding images, these slides are quite image heavy, and finding images is a little bit difficult. But this one's about approval. This slide's about content approval. That's a seal. It's a seal of approval. Yeah, down the back. You'll love this then. That's a seal of approval. That's a disapproving seal. come on. Anyway. All squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. So all documents are entities, but not all entities are documents. So it follows then that workflow should work for rectangles and not just squares. Whereas workflow's only been concerned with documents, and documents are squares, not rectangles. But it should work with rectangles and parallelograms and trapezoids and any sort of rectangular prism. And that was a good analogy when I put those slides together. It probably doesn't make as much sense now. But the idea is that we want workflow to be independent of what the entity is and just work on an entity. If anyone can tell me who that fine-looking gentleman is, I will buy them a beer when we're finished. Hey? No. That is Rogelio de Jesus Merritt. Roger Merritt, the frontman of legendary New York hardcore band Agnostic Front. Agnostic Workflows, Agnostic Front. I said images are hard. Anyway. So entity-agnostic workflows are sort of an architectural shift that we are making in Workflow 16, where, like I said, any entity can host a workflow, and that starts with alternate versions. So it won't be workflows on content anymore. It'll just be workflows on anything. And the next step after that is for workflows to not be about approvals at all, but just to be a workflow, where we can say this happens, and then our workflow kicks in, and all these other things have to happen. Approvals might be one of those things, but they should only be one of those things, and they should be an optional thing. So and that opens the door then to smarter, more flexible approvals across the board. What about media? Media is a big goal, and it's a complicated goal because media does not have a draft state. Media exists or it doesn't. When it's saved, it's public and it's published. So the issue there isn't how workflow would work. I know how workflow needs to work, but it's where does it work? Because there is nowhere for that workflow process to live. So it's absolutely a goal. It's always been a goal, and it's just one I'm not entirely sure how to kick. So entity-agnostic workflows at the moment are fairly internal. It's working for alternate versions. Haven't checked it or tried to make it work for anything else, but I think the logic is sound, and it should transfer across other entities. The idea there is that you'll be able to declare the entity type for your workflow, and through a bit of back-office configuration magic, we can build the submission mode, or the one that you currently get that asks for a comment and maybe a published date, unpublished date. You'll be able to configure that and capture the information that you need for workflow to create a workflow for that entity type. Super clear. Now that image makes sense because it's an extension. So we're introducing an entity workflow initializer extension type in Umbraco 16, which is responsible for collecting the required data for that workflow process to work. And like I said, it works with alternate versions, so obviously will just work everywhere. Sure. So this one's a task. It actually came up independent of everything I've been talking about, but it ties in really, really nicely. To be able to define yourself what you want to capture to store against a workflow when it's submitted. Like I said, at the moment we capture a comment and maybe a media attachment, I think was one of the options. And then we can, if we let you configure that and capture whatever data you need, you can then feed that into, say, custom audit trails or custom reporting, and you can use it deeper in the workflow process to influence what happens in that workflow process. To be honest, this hasn't progressed much further than a backlog task at the moment, but the general idea, I think, is similar to how we manage custom workflows and forms, where we add some metadata to a C# class that defines the workflow because we need it both on the server and the client, and then workflow can generate the UI based off that metadata. Workflow then handles persistence, everything else the way it is currently. We might be able to provide reporting and auditing or something out of the box, or at least, I guess, provide mechanisms so that you can incorporate your own custom data into the back office and into workflows, reports, and tables and views and things. And again, yeah, what about media? That might be the solution for media, that extensible extensible workflow data, where we could potentially, in theory, track changes to a file upload, create a temporary file somewhere that sits there until the workflow's finished. When the workflow finishes, we can switch them back out again. Might work, might not work. There's probably all sorts of holes in that idea, but I guess whether that's valid or not, it's just to highlight the intent of making that submission data extensible. You can capture something up front, use it again later. And how does that work? So the next few slides are looking at how this is implemented in the new back office. A lot of it is sort of internal implementation kind of detail that probably don't need to necessarily know about to use this function, but I think it's really interesting to see how we can extend the back office with, in reality, not a lot of lines of code. So our entity workflow initializer is an interface, and just like an interface in C#, it defines a contract, and anything that implements that interface has to fulfill that contract. This one's pretty simple. We have to provide two methods. Get is new, get is saved, describing the entity that the workflow is being applied to. And then we also provide an observable with some additional data. The identity for the entity, probably the back office GUID, like the key value. A type for the entity, it might be a document, it might be an alternate version. One day it might be media. At the moment, this asks for a culture, which it probably doesn't need to because we can access that via the context API. We don't need you to provide it. There's some other fields, probably some names that need changing, but that's the idea. We define an initializer that must fulfill this interface. And then to get that into the back office, that's legible. We register it with another interface. We create a manifest. And that manifest defines the type, which is our workflow initializer, and it says it has to have an entity type. It's the only other property it has to bring, because that's what workflow needs to know so that it knows where to attach or how to generate the correct process. By adding that manifest interface into the Umber extension manifest map, we have access to all the typings when we come to start doing our imports and exports of manifests. We don't have to import concrete types. We get the nice generics, and it just works. The CMS has been built beautifully. We don't have to think too much. It's great. And again, like I said, this is all internal. You don't need to know about this, but it's just to highlight how we extend the back office in perhaps, I don't want to say more complex ways, but they're not the sort of surface ways of adding a new property editor or things like that. It's a little bit deeper. And then, if you've done anything in the back office, manifests should not be unfamiliar. We just register our workflow initializer as its own manifest type. This one is for documents, so it has the entity type of document, and the API property at the very bottom imports the actual initializer class. In that class, you can do whatever you need. It must fulfill that interface that we looked at previously, but you can do whatever you need to do in there to fulfill that interface. So if you've ever, like I said, if you've ever looked under the covers of the new back office, / the back office, shouldn't be called the new back office anymore, it's 18 months old, you will have seen this before, it shouldn't be unfamiliar. This will be because this is somewhere from deep inside workflow, just to show how we then use those initializers. So it's registered. We pull it out of the extensions registry, because we know we want the workflow initializer types, and we know we want the one that pertains to the current entity type for the workspace that we're in. So if we're in a document workspace, the entity type is going to be document, so we want the workflow initializer for the document entity type. We might get more than one because people can register more than one. So we only take the first one. There might be a better way to determine which one we should keep, but we take the first. We load it. We create an instance in that last line, that new API, and that's where we use the initializer args that we saw earlier in the initializer class. We pass it as an observable because we don't want it to be a point in time. We want it to be something we can respond to. But again, this is all internal to workflow. Don't really need to know about it. Takeaway is, soon enough, we can bring our own entity workflows into the back office. And there's a client-side implementation. There's also a server-side implementation, which he requires an entity locator, an instance generator, an instance populator, and an instance resolver. These are not new. These have always been part of workflow, but they've been blocks of code inside larger classes. They're now pulled out and rebuilt with extension in mind. So how does that work? Real quickly, the blue bits there are the things that you can bring of your own. So from top to bottom, from the back office, we kick off a workflow. We go to the workflow process factory, which determines the correct workflow process for that entity type. And that's where that extensible data that we were looking at before, that's where this starts to be useful, because it's available now in any of those blue classes, and you can use that to influence what happens within the workflow. That workflow process requests a new instance from the workflow instance generator, and that generator is responsible for ensuring that the correct data is available for the workflow. So for an alternate version, we need to know the unique key of the parent document. So that all happens in the generator. It happens in the generator, but is delivered by an instance populator. And I know this sounds a little bit convoluted and intertwined, but we need it to be these 3 separate steps because we reuse these classes later in other places within workflow where we don't necessarily need the process, we might just need to know how to populate one. So we can pass things around, and it's all, it's .NET, it's just DI, we can add things, remove things, however we need. Then we get to the end of a workflow. So this is the last stage in a workflow. And the action that we have to take at the end is now going to differ based on the entity. Whereas previously, when everything was a document, we knew we just want to publish it, or we just leave it and let the scheduler deal with it. But for other entities, we need to know what to do with them. And that is what happens in the workflow instance resolver. So for an alternate version, we don't publish it, we just change the status. And that resolver receives the current workflow instance. It can do whatever it needs to do. We can inject other services and things. We can do whatever you want to do at the end of that workflow. And again, these slides are kind of implementation, internal detail, but just wanting to highlight that we'll be able to make it more pluggable, leverage the core parts of workflow, make it extensible, and kind of, instead of workflow dictating how to use it, it sort of pushes it back to you guys to find the best use cases for what you're doing. Once that's all more refined, it'll be documented and everyone will be happy. And I believe we're pretty much at the end. So looking back, Workflow 16 is a big step towards smarter, more editor-friendly content governance with alternate versions for improved editorial flow, release sets for, what do we want to say, advanced scheduling, and entity-agnostic workflows for deeper flexibility, increased flexibility. And that is me done. That's me. Well, this is me. That's my email address. Either way, you can email me there. You can talk to me. I think there's a workflow session in the TP right now, so that's not super convenient for anyone who's here and wants to be there. But that's it. That's me. Thank you all for sticking with me. Appreciate it.